We are recording the interview of Dr. Kathy Platoni. This interview is being conducted by Jennifer Seavey from Wright State University's Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Dr. Platoni's office in Centerville, Ohio. It is 3 p.m., July 21st, 2016. Okay, so where and when were you born?
I was born in Mount Kisco, New York on April 28th, 1952. Yes, I'm an old soldier.
So who were your parents and what were their occupations?
Well, my father was a Navy veteran. He fought in World War II. He was exposed to radiation during the bombing of Nagasaki, which took his life at the age of 57. But he started out as a telephone pole climber, making $25 a week in a little town called a village called Amawalk, New York, and later became a very successful real estate agent without even a high school diploma. He was born in New York City and spent much of his life in upstate New York, very rural. And my mother was born in Chicago, Illinois, first generation born, as was my father. Parents, both sets of their parents were from the old country, and she became a school teacher and is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin.
Okay. Do you have any siblings?
I have a half-sister by the name of Lynette, and she too lives in upstate New York.
Did she serve in the military as
No.
well? No. Okay. So what were you doing before you entered the service?
Well, I had completed my master's degree in counseling psychology I attended Hobart and William Smith College, received my bachelor's degree in psychology and biology in 1974, went on to get my master's at the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida, in counseling psychology, graduated in 1975, worked for several years living in the Miami area. Worked extensively with developmentally disabled and seriously mentally ill populations, and that entire time I kept applying to graduate school to get my doctorate in psychology. And when I finally got accepted to Nova Southeastern University School of Professional Psychology, I had no idea how I was going to pay for it on a salary of $16,000 a year, doing primarily social work. So my dean was a friend of the Undersecretary of the Army, and they sent me an application for an Army scholarship, and I thought, this is not me, but I got the scholarship. I was one of 3 scholarship winners for the Health Professional Scholarship, and it paid for my entire education. Okay. I didn't spend a dime, so it paid for my doctorate for five years. I had a 4-year hitch to pay back, and I extended a year. I wasn't quite ready to leave the Army after I completed my internship at William Beaumont Army Medical Center in El Paso, Texas, and then did my postdoc at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and Walter Reed Army Medical Center and Malcolm Groh Air Force Medical Center. So I extended that 1 year, got married before the end of my tour, went back to Fort Belvoir while my husband in the Air Force was just moving here. Lasted 2 weeks, and I had to join the reserves. I couldn't stand being out of uniform, and that was 30 years ago. So, I'm sorry, 29 years ago. So this is my 35th year of military service.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You gotta love it.
Yeah. Let's see. So, which branch of the military did you say you served in?
Army, both Army Reserve, and now as a retiree of the Army Reserve, I'm the chief psychologist for the Ohio Military Reserve, which is a branch of the National Guard, Ohio National Guard.
Okay. So why did you choose that branch?
They were the only ones that offered me a scholarship. Nobody else wanted me. And I'm not sorry.
Okay. So what was basic training like for you?
You know, our basic training was really easy. This was in 1981. It was medical officer basic training. So we didn't spend a whole lot of time in the field like other troops just going into the regular Army did. Now things have changed since then. So I did my medical officer basic training at Fort Ord in Monterey, California. And Fort Ord no longer exists. It's the Presidio of San Francisco. But I thought, you know what, I think I made the right decision. I absolutely loved it. But a lot of it was just an introduction to the Army because none of us had ever been in uniform before. So we had to learn how to wear the uniform and military courtesies and lingo and how the Army Medical Department operated, and then maybe about 3 days in the field. It was easy. So that was basic training.
That's nice. Do you recall any of your instructors?
I don't recall their names, but I sure recall those instructors, and they were wonderful. And they were high-ranking NCOs, and I think that probably gave me one of the best tastes of the Army that I ever had. Much more so than any of the psychologists that were our preceptors during our medical officer basic.
Okay. So when you went in, what was your MOS?
73 Bravo, clinical psychologist.
Okay. And did you receive any other specialized training?
As a psychologist, yes, postdoctoral training, and I had some other areas of concentration. I can't remember what they were, but they were all basically related to being a clinical psychologist.
Okay. Okay. And how do you feel you adapted to military life?
Oh, it just fit me like a glove. At first, I wasn't a field rat. I hated going out into the field, and even though, we had our nice office to work out of, particularly during internship, I did everything I could to avoid going out into the field when we usually would have to do that for a few days. But then when I started getting deployed, I found that I adapted to that better than anything else. I love being out in the field, so bring it on. So I love deploying. I'm still on retiree recall, so if they call me up, I am packed and ready to go.
Nice. Okay. So where all have you served?
Well, again, I started out at Fort Ord for Medical Officer Basic at Silas B. Hayes Army Medical Center. I completed my internship at William Beaumont Army Medical Center in El Paso at Fort Bliss. Then for 3.5 years, I was the 4 years, chief psychologist at Fort Belvoir, Virginia at, what was the name? I can't remember the name of the medical center. DeWitt Army Community Medical, Army Hospital. It was a smaller Army hospital. Left the Army, ETS'd at that point, and then joined the reserves. I was in the 2291st U.S. Army Hospital that was on the grounds of the Dayton VA. Then I later transferred to the 55th Medical Company Combat Stress Control. I've served with the 307th Medical Group, which is now Medical Command, out of Columbus. The 467th Medical Detachment out of Madison, Wisconsin, the 1908th Medical Detachment out of Topeka, Kansas, the 113th Medical Company out of Los Angeles. I was the commander of the 1972nd Medical Detachment when we deployed to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where the detention camps are. Then I was with the 1493rd Medical Company, Medical Detachment out of Cary, North Carolina. And now I'm with the 4th Civilian Support and Sustainment Brigade, Ohio Military Reserve in Columbus. I think that covers all the units I've been in.
Sure. That's plenty of them. So you mentioned that you've gone out of the States. What are some memories of that experience that you have?
Oh, they are countless. I think the most powerful memories I have are of being in Ramadi during the height of the war and the seat of the insurgency during Operation Iraqi Freedom. We lost so many soldiers. There was just so much to grieve, but the camaraderie and the bonds of brother-sister soldiers and being embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division is probably one of the best experiences of my life. And even though there's a wide gap between being a psychologist and being with infantry soldiers, that was where my heart still lies with those soldiers, and we still remain close to this day. I saw a lot of combat, I saw a lot of death, I saw a lot of human suffering. We were RPG'd and rocketed and mortared and shot at with small arms fire all day long and all night long. But those bonds will sustain for a lifetime. And the same applied in Afghanistan. I was embedded with the 4th Infantry Division as a psychologist for the 467th Medical Detachment, and again saw terrible casualties and loss of life. But again, with the 4th ID, still remain very closely tied to some of those soldiers. So I would say, out of all of my deployments, the bonds of brother-sister soldiers stands out as some of the most powerful life experiences I've ever had.
So you mentioned you witnessed combat. Is there any experiences that you'd like to share?
Combat on the home front, actually. I'm a survivor of the Fort Hood Massacre. My unit was one of those targeted by the shooter, Nadal Hassan. And we were in the Soldier Readiness Processing Center getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan. And I was supposed to be his direct supervisor, so I was pretty much at the top of his hit list. I just happened to be in another building at the time, although I had been in the building where the shooting started a very short time before he unloaded on our soldiers and assassinated them in cold blood. That has affected my life probably more powerfully than any of my other experiences. We lost 5 soldiers from our unit that day. My unit and my sister unit, with 13 wounded among the 45 who were wounded and the 13 killed. And that's something you can't unsee. And the desperate attempts to save the lives of these soldiers, well, we saved some and we didn't save others. And that's something I live with every day, and it is a very painful series of memories and losses that will mark my life forever. And to see that happen and unfold on U.S. soil is something that even today defies reality. It's still surreal.
True. So on a lighter note, what kind of friendships and camaraderie have you formed while serving?
Oh my God, the best. They're my family. I think because you go through things that nobody else would understand unless they've been through the same thing. So the ties that have bound us will remain for a lifetime, and those are the people I turn to, even more so than my own family, for support, to unburden. It's a closeness that is far greater than anything I've ever experienced with any other friendships, because these are the people who truly understand what it is to go through that kind of trauma and that kind of survivorship. So that's the best of everything.
Okay. How did you stay in touch with family and friends?
Well, there were no phone calls coming out of Iraq. We did have phone privileges. Maybe once a week I could call home in Gitmo, because that was a much more civilized place. Mm-hmm. But in Iraq, yeah, we didn't have any phones. So if we had internet, I could keep in touch. But that was hit or miss. And we would go to what we called camo blackouts whenever there were deaths, which were numerous and continuous. They would shut down all communications by internet and telephone if you were lucky to be near a phone bank or have a cell phone issued to you, which I did not. So I didn't call home at all, because there was no way to do that. And you know, my family knew if they didn't hear from me, I was either dead or there was a camo blackout. But communication in Iraq was very sporadic. While I was in Ramadi, we were issued a satellite phone, so I was able to call my husband one night, just one night. And he was at work. He's now a realtor, and I called him and we were discussing the houses he was showing, and all of a sudden we came under attack. And there's no good way to say, we're under attack, so I'd say, well, got something going on here, gotta go. And you know, all these explosions going off in the background. I didn't tell him till I got home, but it was hilarious the way I broke the news to him when I got home. In Afghanistan, I only called home when I was able to borrow a cell phone before we left Kandahar. After that, we didn't have any phones, 2 cups and a string. But internet was a little bit better, so it was primarily through internet communications.
Okay.
So calling home, if you wanted to wait online for 4 hours at a phone bank, okay, I didn't have that kind of time. I had too many soldiers to treat.
Sure. So what did you do while not on a mission or performing your duties?
You know, we were on mission 24/7, literally. I was one of very, very few psychologists, both in Iraq and Afghanistan, so you were constantly busy and out on missions outside the wire. And when inside the wire, you had appointments all day long, and if there was a crisis at night, and those were numerous, you were always on duty. I might have half a day off every 2 weeks. We would have a rotational off schedule, but since I was the commander of our small combat stress control teams, who are they going to go to? So I gave my soldiers, my enlisted soldiers who were mental health technicians, the time off, and I would always take the emergencies. So it was constant. There's very little respite from work. On those times where I did have a few hours off here and there, I would read profusely. I think I read 37 books in Iraq and 35 in Afghanistan because it was the best way I could block things out of my head. So reading was it. It's not like I've got TV or movies or a mall to go through. There's nothing. There's nothing.
Okay. So when you finally came home, what were your feelings about that?
I missed it. After about a year, I was ready for the next deployment. So I just missed it. I felt like after about a year or 2 years, that itch to go back was there. Because once you've tasted that adrenaline rush, it's very hard to find that anywhere else except skydiving.
I've heard
That's
this.
short-lived. and I still miss it. I'm still itching. Very, very much so. And it's very hard to find a place where people truly understand your experiences. I've had many of my civilian friends have gone by the wayside because they've said very unkind or insensitive things, like, get over it. Well, if I could get over it, I would have gotten over it. The lack of awareness, and let's face it, less than 1% of the American populace serves in the military, so they really have nothing to compare it to. They don't know what it's like to live with things that you can't unsee. And as I mentioned, the very cruel remarks have ended some friendships. And that's why it's so important to still have that camaraderie with the soldiers I serve with now and the soldiers I've served with for years and years.
Yeah.
It's often a lonely place.
So how did you return home? By plane?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, I had, from Afghanistan, I had to come home twice. I had to come home on emergency leave because my mother was killed by her boyfriend, so I had to come home to bury my mother and then go back to the war zone. They gave me the option to stay home, and I refused. I absolutely refused. I had a mission to perform, and nothing was going to stand in the way of that. When we came home the second time with my unit, we flew home on several military aircraft, ended up in Kyrgyzstan at Manas Air Base. We were there for, I want to say, a week before we could get a chartered flight out. I think we went through, it wasn't Landstuhl, it was, actually this time it was a civilian airport in Germany, and then back to Chicago. I'm sorry, from that civilian air base to Joint Base Lewis McChord. We were there for about I want to say a week, 10 days, going through all of our medical checks, the soldier readiness process again, getting all of our physical exams, whatever we needed, and then from there we went home to our own homes. So it was almost too fast because you don't have a chance to really unload your experiences, so it was coming home to a very strange place, as it was on my other deployments.
Yeah. How are you received by your family and the community?
I have to say very, very well, for the most part. I think my family has somewhat of an understanding, particularly since I send them all my writings. I publish a lot of articles. We wrote 2 books, so I think they understand better than most. I have to say the community has been, for the most part, very, very receptive. I give a lot of keynote addresses and seminars, and I'm often sought after in the news media to try to explain what veterans go through and what people who are the victims of a mass shooting go through. So I would say very, very well, but they still don't understand. And I'll give you an example. I went to see 13 Hours with a friend of mine who's a psychologist and a friend of his who's a licensed professional counselor. And she also is a counselor from Military One Source. Well, she pretty much, without saying it, called me a warmonger and made some very vile comments to me about being in the military, and here she is treating military members and their families. Then she made the very ignorant remark, well, you must have been very young when you deployed. She obviously didn't know when the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were. I mean, I deployed in my late 50s, for crying out loud. She had no clue. I was so enraged. It was all that I could do to keep from turning the table over on her in Applebee's. I still will have nothing to do with her because of the ignorance and stupidity. And you will have that. It happens far too often.
So how have you been adjusting to civilian life?
It's 6 years after the fact, and I'm still trying to adjust.
Yeah.
Once you've tasted war, it's very hard to put your old self on. It's not hanging in the closet. And I still miss it very, very much. I still itched to go back.
So you mentioned that you've kept in touch with fellow soldiers and stuff?
Yes. As often as possible.
Good.
Yes.
Do you guys meet up or talk on the phone? Or?
We do meet up, we do talk on the phone, and we do email. We've had a number of memorial ceremonies for those who were killed at Fort Hood, and that's one place where several of us have gotten together. We also had the Yellow Ribbon program, so we were mandated for about a year after we returned from Afghanistan to have these seminars where we could start to process what we'd been through. Some of them were very well done, some of them were very poorly done. But it helped to be together, and we will continue to meet up when that opportunity arises, and that's just the way it's going to be.
Good. So are you a member of any veteran organizations?
Yes, I belong to the American Legion. I have not yet joined the VFW, but since I'm still in the Ohio Military Reserve, I do get my soldier fix through that.
Okay, there you go. Have you gone or been a part of the Dayton Honor Flight?
I have not, because I'm not old enough.
I mean, don't they take all veterans?
I know they've done several for World War II veterans. I don't know if they've done any for OIF and OEF veterans yet. But because I'm not completely on the veteran side of the house, I'm still serving in uniform, I haven't taken advantage of that and want that to be for those who are completely out of the military.
Sure.
And save those seats for them.
Okay. So what have you been doing? You're not entirely separated from the military, but what have you been doing since you've been not full-time?
Writing books, writing articles. I lecture all over the country. I'm a national expert in PTSD. I have a full-time private practice. I'm here at least 6 days a week. I'm the Dayton SWAT psychologist, so I train with them and go on all their call-outs. I'm the clinical advisor to the Dayton hostage negotiation team. I'm the editor of the Combat Stress e-magazine, so I do a lot of writing and editing through that. I'm on the volunteer faculty, the adjunct faculty at Wright State University. I run a police officer peer support group, one of my pro bono activities. What else? I think that covers. So I work 7 days a week. Yeah,
busy lady.
Works for me. Busy works, yes.
Okay. So, let's see. How do you feel your wartime experiences have affected your life?
Oh boy. Excuse me. It has taught me things I never would have learned otherwise and helped me be better at what I do as a psychologist because I understand things from a very different perspective, and that plays out both with the veterans that I deal with, which are many, and in the police officers that I deal with. I have many police officers on my caseload. I work with numerous police departments in the area of Southwest Ohio, so I understand trauma, I understand shootings, I understand from a different level because I've walked in the same trenches, and many of them are still in the reserves and National Guard also. So I have a very deep understanding in many ways of what they go through as well. I think it's taught me things about humanity and about the world at large and the different cultures we deal with that I never would have understood. So I'm so grateful even for the tragic experiences because it has widened my horizons in ways that never would have happened otherwise. I'm very blessed with that.
So how has the military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
You know, I think anybody who wears the uniform has signed on that dotted line where it says, I will die for you. I think to dedicate yourself to something that's so much larger than the self, it's a gift to humanity and society and the world at large. I think that the opportunity to do something that noble is a gift to the self and a gift to this country. Country, not ourselves. And I think everybody should have that opportunity. Like in Israel, everybody serves in some capacity for 2 years, whether it's the Bureau of Indian Affairs or the Peace Corps or the Job Corps or the military. I think it changes you for the better in countless ways. And I wish we had that in this country.
So, what message would you like to leave for future generations who will see this interview?
Oh boy. Dedicate yourself to something bigger than your own circle of whatever it is that you belong to. Devote yourself to something that comes back to you for people who are in need, people who suffer, people who need a listening ear. Take time to find a commitment that's outside of what you do for yourself. Serve humanity in some capacity. Do something for somebody else because you will pay it forward in ways that will come back to you 100-fold. Look outside your own back door and your own front door because there's somebody who needs something from somebody else. Do not be afraid to give that. Those are where I think our greatest rewards lie. And I live by the motto, country, not ourselves. And go there if you can and serve in some capacity.
Okay. Now you said you did tours in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Yes.
How long were you over there?
Well, almost a year. Our deployments were between, I want to say 14 and 18 months long if you consider all the pre-mobilization training, because we had intensive training similar to what combat arms units go through at several different locations around the country. More so before we went to Afghanistan than Iraq. I also served an extra 6 months at Fort Benning, Georgia, by invitation of the commander of the 3rd Infantry, the commander of the 2nd of the 69th Armor, which was part of the 3rd Infantry Division. So I spent 6 months at Fort Benning, Georgia, serving the troops returning. Okay. So really, we spent between 10 and a half and 11 months in country. Then I did another 6 months at Fort Benning after Iraq, and then pre-mobilization, mobilization training, and then returning to the States. So between 12 and 18 months, and just short of 12 months in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, where the detention camps are. Operation Desert Storm, I served stateside for 6 months at 4 different military installations in Virginia. Tried to get to Saudi, but never got there.
You tried.
Tried to get into the thick of things.
Sure. Okay. All right. right. Well, is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
Boy, you have done a very thorough interview and asked all the right questions. Very well done.
Thank you.
I'm just so grateful that you and Voices of Veterans is interested in the experience of those of us who have served. I thank you so much for that. It's so nice to know that people really do want to listen and hear what it's been like from our perspective. So that's a gift to any of us who have worn the uniform or continue to wear the uniform. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you for sharing. Was there anything else you'd like to add?
I think that about covers it.
Okay. All right. Well, that concludes our interview, and thank you for your service.
Thank you for appreciating our service in the way that you do. A lot of people say that, but they really don't know what that means. It's pretty clear that you do, or you wouldn't be doing this.
That would be right.
So that is greatly appreciated, and I will surely send you my Vita and my bio sketch so you've got all the rest of the information.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I just